general proposal. I want you to think big picture. Please don't do this and evaluate it for like 3 minutes, turning it around, because that didn't do anything. So it's very strategic the way that I want you to do your design. Everybody does that rotation to evaluate it. What I want you to do first is just go through these steps. So the first thing that I'm looking at is, this is my initial proposal. If I get some crazy nonsense happening, I know that my orientation is screwed up, probably. If it's a partial coverage restoration and you didn't use selection area, which I don't do most of the time, you can do it with inlays. Most of the time with onlays you don't really need it. That may have also contributed. Usually it's one of those two things. So you don't always have to do a selection area. I would, probably 50% of the time you have to do it with an inlay. With an onlay, usually not. But if your orientation is perfect, proposal's still crazy, you can try selection area for partial coverage, and that may fix it for you. All right, so here's my initial proposal. I'm looking at my central fossa. My cuspal alignment is good. I'm good with all of that. So now I'm going to go to my incremental change tools, and then I'm going to go ahead and place my clone on top. When I place my clone on top, which they've now changed to stone color, don't love that, but that's okay, it is what it is. I'm going to now use some tools. I can see that my restoration is too high. How do I know that? I know that because my restoration is purple, my clone is stone, and I don't see any stone. So I'm going to come down until my restoration is mostly, but not all, underneath my clone. So I see little bits and pieces, but most of it is underneath here. So I'm happy with that. So I'm using my big movement tools when I need to move big areas of tooth. Whole rotations, move a whole wall out, pull the occlusal surface down. I'm not doing refined things with these tools. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my freeform change tools, and I'm going to start my design process. So I'm going to click on my slice plane, and I'm going to use my left mouse click button to take my slice plane right down the central fossa of my teeth. I care more about the tooth that I'm working on, so remember, if you have malaligned teeth, you want to take it down the central fossa of the tooth that you're actually working on. Don't stress about the others. Okay? And then I'm going to scroll in. I'm going to move this down. Remember, center roller is a button, so you can move your whole model down to the middle of the screen. And I'm going to roll this in until my little squares are 1/2 millimeter. So each one of these little squares is telling you right here on the screen they're 1/2 millimeter. And is that important? I don't know. I'll leave it up to you. The reason that I do it is because the whole time I'm designing, I can monitor my material thickness. I can actually look at how thin any particular area is while I'm designing. So now I'm going to come in with my absolute favorite, which is rubber tooth. And I'm going to bring my restoration about 1/3 of a block below in my functional areas. This is the same principle as when you do a bite registration of any kind. You technically are in negative occlusion if you look at the little guide over there on the side. This is the same thing. So I'm going to go about 1/3 of a block below. That's not everywhere on my restoration because remember, this is anatomy that I'm following. So if I sit here, I'm going to take away all the beautiful anatomy of the tooth that was proposed. So all I care about is the tooth functioning in a few areas and the rest of it that it's actually below for occlusion purposes. Now I know that this is a little bit shy, so I'm going to bring this out. And notice that I'm bringing it out in more than one place. You didn't see me go like this to bring it over because that's what happens. You get those little concavities and craziness, and then you turn off your clone and you're at the occlusal view and you're like, oh my gosh, what kind of putty is that? Look it up on the screen because rubber tooth is crazy for some people. But if you make those small movements, actually I'll leave it like that. Even if it's like as severe as this, if I make small movements here and bring this down to 0.8 of a millimeter, I can get that natural contour back and move it over to where I need it to be without making a crazy tooth. Does that make sense? And marginal ridges, I want them to align. So ideally, I'm going to get my marginal ridges to align. I'm not worried about contact strength, so if it's here, I'm okay with that. I'm going to do that later. I'm not worried about that right now. Also looking at this embrasure space. So in this view, as the book highlights, I'm looking at occlusion, 1/3 of a block below. I'm looking at material thickness, obviously have plenty of that. Marginal ridge alignment and contour, and then embrasure contours here. All of those things I can see from this view. Now I'm going to roll out. I'm going to click on my slice plane again. I'm going to go buccal to lingual, and I'm going to go to the set of cusp tips that's most like the tooth that I'm working on. So obviously first molar to second molar. Again, I'm going to roll into 1/2 millimeter. I'm going to rotate it. In this view, I'm not paying attention to my clone below my head of contour. I'm going to idealize it with the tooth that's left up to the functional portion of the tooth. So what does that mean? If from here to here, I didn't scan my clone, it's going to come in like this. I'm not going to copy that in my restoration. I'm just going to idealize that nice natural curvature that happens. Also, I'm looking at my possible incline interferences by bringing this down right like that. And cuspal alignment, I can evaluate central fossa alignment. All of these things I can see from here. Nice small movements. And I'm doing this a little bit differently, but what I would encourage you to do if you're unfamiliar with this design process, start from the cervical and move to incisal, and that will also help you in keeping that natural contour. It'll also remind you to make small movements, not to do any one movement in one area. Does that make sense? All right, so I'm going to roll out. I'm going to go to my next area, like this. And you won't have to make every change to every single tooth. You just have the ability to be able to see it, which most labs, unless they have digital, they don't have the ability to do that. Then I'm going to turn this off, and if I have any areas that are still high, I'm just going to very lightly bring those down just until they're under. Right like that. Just a little bit. There we go. Do I care if this is sticking out of my clone? Nope. Don't care about that. It's non-functional. All right. So now I'm going to make my clone translucent, and I'm going to turn on my actual material thickness. If I have any areas that are thin, which we're talking about Dr. Sutt here, so yes, I do. I'm going to, if I can, I'm going to bring those areas out a little bit. Right like this, while leaving my clone on top. And I don't care about the clone down here, but if those areas, the reason I leave my clone on top is if those areas are on the biting surface and I need to bring them up, and I can't, I can see that within my clone. So now I'm going to make my bite high, so I have to make a decision at that point in time, is this enough? Do I need to make another change? Or if you really want to evaluate it in more detail, you do have the flexibility to be able to come in here and slice right in the middle of that thin area and see truly how much clearance you have. If you have enough room, you could come in and just move it up right like this. And it's just a little bit more accurate of an area right there. Okay? All right, so now I'm done with my clone, and I'm done with my, that was that big craziness I did over there. And I'm done with my material thickness. So because I made a big craziness over here, I'm going to come in with now my smooth surface. I smooth every contact before I adjust it. I don't care if it's already out of occlusion, if it's heavy, I don't care. What I'm looking for is to make a nice smooth area, because we know how accurate our mill is. It will mill a tooth booby right in the contact if I have one there. So I want to make sure that I smooth it out. Tooth booby is my phrase. All right, so I'm coming in, I'm just smoothing any of the areas that I pulled on. I try and stay away from the anatomy as much as possible. Please, please, please try your best not to touch the occlusal surface. Even if you're in the contact area, if you have a very narrow interproximal area that you prep, it's very easy to smooth that anatomy right there. So if you turn it up, the computer will not let you smooth the inside of the restoration. So you turn it up like this, and it'll keep it away. Okay? So you don't have to worry about that anymore, because I run into those situations as well. All right, so I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to check those contacts. There's that situation right there. I don't have a contact. So what do? I'm going to turn this back on, just so I can see exactly where my contact should be. And I'm just going to gradually bring this over until I have the contact that I'm looking for as far as shape is concerned and breadth. Right like that. And then I can actually look at intensity boost. For us, contacts are purple with a blue center, and I can glaze them. But that might not be for everybody. So if you have your contacts and they're working for you, don't worry about it. If you don't, try purple with a blue center and work from there. You shouldn't have to go more than 3 or 4 restorations before you get contacts that are a floss pop or whatever you prefer every time, and you're not having to adjust them. If you're adjusting most or all of your contacts, it does not have to be that way. I don't want that to be your preference. Just because that's what your lab used to do doesn't mean it has to be like that in your office. So at this point in time, I'd make some changes, but I'm done with my design for the most part. So the last thing I would do before I go to mill is I would make the decision. I really am not a big fan of adjusting my spacer. If anything, I make this a little bit more snug. Dr. Sutt does not like sloppy restorations. So I'm not going to say that you need to do that. That's case specific for your mill and your office and your prep. But marginal ramp is a little bit of a different story. If you have enough of a shoulder that you can support thickening this, please do it. It's going to give you a better fitting restoration with stronger margins. So at this point, I would bring this up. In this one, I would do to a full millimeter. Click apply, and it would apply. And I'm going to show you what that actually means. So after it applies, I'm going to turn the model on so you can see it. Right like this. I'm going to slice plane it for you. And marginal ramp is this little area right here. So it's how much glass touches the tooth. Watch this right here. How much glass touches the tooth before the dive spacer begins. Watch it go away. Today. See that? So how much stronger is my restoration going to be at the margin, which is the part that we're always worried about, if I can strengthen this particular area right here. Also, what I've noticed is that when you're doing like an inlay, this is necessary for closing vertical openings in boxes. I don't understand it, but it works. That's what, years ago we had a major problem with that, and when I increase my marginal ramp, it actually will close that box if you have a vertical opening. If it's short, that's a different story. You probably put the margin in the wrong place, or if something was wrong with the scan is usually the case, but as far as the vertical opening, this is usually what the problem is. Okay? Yes?
My understanding was for onlays you need to decrease that. It seems that it's the opposite.
I absolutely do the opposite.
Yeah.
And I think that for that, again, back to the SOS thing about the vast majority, if you're unfamiliar with prepping for onlays, you know, your laboratory's been just making it work or whatever, and they're probably doing the same thing. If you've learned how to do inlays and onlays properly, and you have the taper that you need, everything's nice and open, we're not prepping for retention because we get the retention from the chemical bond, then we're good to actually increase that and strengthen our tooth. Okay, because where you're going to end up with hang-ups with this is if you have a lot of ins and outs in your prep, and you have a lot of undercuts and problems like that, then you're going to have problems with seat. So don't do this on every single one of your patients and then come to me and say, oh my God, Heather, you ruined my life. If you're having problems, try it with a couple cases. Start at like 50 to half a millimeter, and then gradually work it up. If that works for you, gradually work it up. Don't go to 100 for everybody. And just remember, if it's a full coverage crown, you have enough shoulder, every patient can be at 1 millimeter. Okay? All right, so what I want you to do is everybody should have those cases in. Everybody should